Welcome to Indifferent Strokes, where we dive into healthcare and stroke prevention, as well as stroke recovery. I'm Adrian Bailey, stroke survivor and the founder of Stroke Recovery Now.
And I'm Charles Esenwa, a stroke neurologist and the founder of Smarts Health.
Welcome back for our second episode. I'm excited. Neither of us are podcasters, but we're figuring this all out, right? Because at the end of the day, we really just want to help people. And I think that's one of the things that brought us together was the inspiration to want to try and prevent as many strokes as possible and to be able to help anyone who has suffered a stroke in the past.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Adrian. We want to give people information that they can use to live a healthier life. And so when you asked me to get on this podcast with you, there was only one answer, and that is yes.
Yeah, man, thank you. And today we're going to be talking about the future of healthcare. We've all seen AI, ChatGPT, Apple products, and things like that. And we're going to start talking about how the face of healthcare is going to be changing in the future. We're going to be talking about medical devices, remote visits, and how AI and the industry is going to change in the future.
Yeah, it's an exciting topic because the industry is changing in front of our eyes, and how we take care of people inside the hospital as well as outside the hospital. It's the whole landscape is really transforming. And what we want to do in this episode is introduce the topic of digital health, talk about health AI, and give some praise for the new things that are coming out, but also describe some of the challenges and the things that you need to know as a consumer of digital health.
And I think it's important for people to hear from a real person and a real doctor some valuable information that I think is going to really help you out today, guys.
So yeah, Adrian, I have a lot of patients and people that come to me and say, what's a good trusted site, or what can I trust on the internet? And unfortunately, there's so much data out there, and it's very hard to decipher what's trustworthy and what's not. And so it's only going to get more complicated. It's only going to get more complicated with all the different applications that are coming out, all the different companies, digital health companies, and gadgets, devices that are coming out, algorithms that are coming out. It's an important topic because there is bad information. You can get bad information. And it's also an important topic because these technologies have an opportunity to transform how we practice healthcare. And I believe that they are transforming healthcare for the better.
100%, yeah. And it's wild too, because you talk about misinformation. Because I'm one of those people that, like, I've used AI myself. I've used ChatGPT, and I've had ChatGPT hallucinate on me, right? I've had to give me totally wrong answers and cite sources that don't even exist. So I think people should be really diligent about making sure that they're getting their information from a trusted source. And at this point in time, I don't think we're there yet.
I agree. And I've had ChatGPT hallucinate and create actual research studies that I supposedly wrote, which I didn't write. And it just completely made it up. And it speaks in such an authoritative voice that you want to believe it. It makes it seem like it is a fact, but it's not. And we can take a step back and really just talk about what it is that ChatGPT does. We're not going to get into the technology, nor do I have the expertise in the technology, but essentially what it does is it takes information from every single website available on the internet and looks at the language that's used in that on those websites, and basically creates an answer for you based on everything that's out there on the internet. So the big problem with that is that, again, back to the WebMD issue, there's a lot of nonsense on the internet, and it doesn't really know how to distinguish between bad content versus good content. And because there's also so much content, at some point it starts to just create its own responses that aren't net grounded in fact. It's just a language model, and therefore all it's doing is calculating what is the next word that should come after the previous one. And so it's essentially creating a language response rather than a factual response.
Places like Apple have now jumped into the game, and the world's never going to be the same.
It's interesting, Adrian, because as Apple announced their Dr. AI initiative, everyone's scrambling to try to figure out what it is and what it can do. And I think only time will tell. We're not really sure yet. As a physician, I'm not really sure how I feel about it until I can get my hands on it and get some real world feedback. There are some examples already from the Apple Watch and how it can detect atrial fibrillation. How we use it in the medical space is yet to be determined.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a friend today, and he was telling me how he has an Apple Watch and he was trying to stop drinking, and he got a notification, and it was just like, your heartbeat has been more, I think it was slower for the past 8 days, and that actually timed up to the day that he stopped drinking. And I was just like, wow, that type of stuff is, to me, really impressive.
Yeah, these technologies are starting to create a different form of medicine. It's more about understanding your own body, having insights into your own physiologic markers, meaning your heart rate, your breathing rate. And so having a better insight of your own body is what these technologies are able to do. How that translates into actual disease prevention or management of disease is unclear, but it's always helpful to have more information. Two reasons. Number one is it allows people to just do the right thing sometimes. So if somebody's is just more health conscious, the Apple Watch, for example, is something that they probably use regularly to keep a check on their body. How are they sleeping? How is their heart rate throughout the day? And so it allows them to just have another marker, another measure of how their body is doing. Another reason why it's healthy potentially is if they do have something serious like atrial fibrillation. And what the Apple Watch does is detect, in the cases that it can actually detect atrial fibrillation, that can potentially prevent a major problem like a stroke in the future. But obviously, in order for us to act on it, we have to review uh, that client's or that patient's finding, and we usually have to do another study just to confirm that this is truly atrial fibrillation.
For sure. After my stroke, I went to go see my cardiologist, and my cardiologist wanted me to wear a heart monitor for 30 days. And I'm like, hey, wait, no, I already have this Fitbit over here, because I did not want to have to wear anything on my chest for 30 days and walk around looking like an android. But at the end of the day, I ended up doing it. And as it turned out, I did have atrial fibrillation. And thank goodness that she was insistent on doing further studies, because the Fitbit at that point hadn't figured anything like that out.
Yeah, and
So
it's a great example of the difference between sort of consumer wellness technologies like a Fitbit, like an Apple Watch, versus medical grade technology that is proven and often FDA cleared for a very specific reason. And that difference is how we can trust the device. If it's a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, I as a doctor don't can't really trust it, and so I usually have to validate it with a clinical tool such as a actual Holter monitor or some other technology that's proven to be medically effective.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that's one of those things where you want to. I just wonder how Apple, what how do they stand by that stuff, right? Because what happens if something goes wrong? Like Apple, I'm sure there's going to be that long terms and agreements in there that basically says we're not responsible if we don't catch something. And I just wonder how that's going to end up panning out because I just don't want people to start counting on these things as if like they're the final word.
Yeah, it's a area that you're raising some really important questions, and it's an area that is still unknown. It's still it's a little bit of a foggy area because we're still developing it. And just to go back to that example of atrial fibrillation, I do want to describe what atrial fibrillation is because it is a good example to talk about within the digital health space, and talk about the evolution of what atrial fibrillation used to be versus what it is now. And so, for our listeners, atrial fibrillation is a major cause of stroke. And it's a potential cause of some other problems, but the major complication of atrial fibrillation is a stroke in the brain. So what happens is the heart regularly should beat, let's say anywhere between 50 to 100 beats per minute. And the way that it does that, it regularly beats. It should be it should be essentially like 1 beat per second. What happens in atrial fibrillation is that the heart becomes irregular. So it's an irregular heart rhythm, and also called an arrhythmia, an abnormal problem with the rhythm of the heart. And when the heart starts to sort of beat irregularly, if you can sort of envision it, blood is supposed to be pumped out of the heart when it contracts, and when it's beating irregularly, some blood sort of gets stuck inside the heart a little bit. And we all know what happens when blood stops moving, it starts to clot. And so this irregular heart rate or heart rhythm called atrial fibrillation often can cause a blood clot to form in the heart. And when the heart starts beating regularly again, because atrial fibrillation can come and go for 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, an hour, whatever it is, when the heart starts beating again, it pushes that blood clot out of the heart. That blood clot goes into the brain and creates a blockage in the brain. The part of the brain that relies on that blood vessel to give it blood stops working because it's no longer getting blood to it. And that's exactly what a stroke is. And so, if we could find atrial fibrillation, we could actually prevent strokes from happening because there are medications that are extremely effective at preventing those blood clots. And so, that's a little bit of the background in atrial fibrillation. And I don't want to bore you or the audience,
Oh
but
no, I think it's actually I think last episode we kind of spoke about the results that I got back after I had that heart monitor where my cardiologist basically said that I had my atrial fibrillation was like a less than 1% occurrence, which means like it was barely happening. So I just wonder, like we had talked about whether a consumer grade product can catch something as small and slight as that, or like you said, using devices that are medically approved just for this, the differences between those two things, and for people to understand that while these devices that are coming out, the future looks very promising, but for now, I think it's definitely important for us to still make sure that we are confirming our health, um, with an actual doctor who can run real tests and really check things for us.
I think that's the key. It's always good to have some insights into your body and have monitors for your body, but that doesn't mean that people should stop paying attention to their doctor or stop seeing a doctor. They go hand in hand, and I think they help each other out quite a lot. We used to in order to detect atrial fibrillation, we used to have to do an EKG, where we put that EKG on, really, really good at detecting the atrial fibrillation. The problem is that as soon as you take the EKG off, you're not monitoring that person's heart
Mm.
anymore. And so medicine went from sort of catching AFib once in a blue moon to now being able to really, through these devices, through evolution of technology, to be able to monitor people like yourself for up to 30 days. And now we even have devices that can monitor people for up to 3 years, where we put the device underneath the skin and it monitors, your body for 3 years. So our medical grade devices are evolving, but they are usually a little bit harder to incorporate into your life than just putting on a watch. And
Sure.
they, putting on a watch can help us decide when to do some of these medical devices. The problem with the consumer technologies, well, let me just start off by saying the benefit of consumer technologies is that once in a while they can uncover a big problem, and when that big problem is uncovered, patient comes to me and says, my Apple Watch found atrial fibrillation, and then I double check and it's true. Now that is the benefit. So it's actually bringing more people that would have otherwise potentially been at risk for stroke to the right place, the medical doctor, and using those data from their devices, we can capture something serious. Now, the downside is exactly what you're saying, which is because these devices are potentially can have some artifact, or they're not necessarily scientifically proven to always capture the right thing. Sometimes they give us false positives, meaning they show us things that are potentially very harmful, but it's not a real finding. And how do you distinguish? That's really where we have a big challenge. Is it's great when it captures something that's real, but more often than not, it could capture something that looks real but is hallucinating. And
Mm.
how do you, because we don't have access to the underlying data, for example, like I can't call Apple and say, send me that waveform. Then it creates some challenges. And the challenges are, one, it can cause stress. Imagine if you don't actually have atrial fibrillation, but your watch is saying you might be at risk of dying or something crazy. Um, I don't know. Is that healthy for somebody's well-being? It's unclear. Another problem, and this is a serious problem whenever we look at whenever we perform any medical test, we have to think about the potential of finding something that's a false positive that can then lead us down the wrong track and uh, lead to more unnecessary tests. And with each round of testing, there is potential for harm. Now, imagine somebody's watch told them that they're having atrial fibrillation when they're really not. And so then they go see a cardiologist, and the cardiologist does a Holter monitor, and then that Holter monitor finds something weird, and then the cardiologist wants to do a cardiac catheter, which is more of an invasive procedure. That cardiac catheter has real risks. How do we get to
Mm.
that cardiac catheter? We got to it because a watch told us that there was something wrong. We really need to be able to understand what are those false positive rates, what are the true
Mm.
positive rates. There's a whole set of science around doing testing, and there are some real specific numbers that we use: sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value. I don't have any of that for the Apple Watch. And so it leaves us
Mm.
experts a little bit hesitant to validate these types of technologies because we weren't present, nor are we nor are we able to see the underlying data.
That's interesting. There's so many things that as we move in this direction that I wonder about. One of the things that I also wonder about are things like privacy. Like, do you really want your watch company to know that you have atrial fibrillation, like where's that data going? Is that like who can they share that with? You know what I mean? I there's things like HIPAA and your HIPAA laws and getting your information out there. I just wonder, like, sometimes you start paving a road and you're like, wait, do I really want to go down this road?
It's another
But
important topic. I think that this is such an important topic to most people these days is privacy. And what you could pretty much guarantee is that anything that is being tracked by a device is somehow being used to create an AI algorithm for another application. So, um,
or a private sector or an
or a private sector.
industry, like who are they potentially lending that information to? Like all of a sudden you're gonna start getting calls from insurance companies, or I don't know who, now that they found out like that your health might be in trouble. You know what I mean? I don't know. It just makes me worried, and like I'm not sure how much I like having my medical information floating amongst, I don't know, data companies and out in the world like that. Like it's one thing if I'm sharing the things that I want to share on a podcast like this or speaking with my doctor, but I don't necessarily want all of my business out in the streets
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, and this is the challenge. It is the companies that do this, the Fitbit, for example, Apple, there's Samsung has their own watch. There's plenty of companies that are getting into healthcare, and they're really getting into the wellness space. Let's be honest. They're not getting into healthcare. They're not medical companies, but for better or worse, they're getting into the wellness space. For the most part, it's a very beneficial thing that they're trying to do, but it shouldn't be medicine. It's not medicine. And so we have to look at it from that lens first of all. And so if it's just wellness, I think it's reasonable for them not to share some of their proprietary info of how they develop these algorithms. What's the data that they're collecting from you? What is the data that is your own personal data that they're sort of using for other applications. That's one thing. I think if this, on the other hand, if this were really being used for like medical indications and used to make medical decisions, this is where usually we have a problem with the whole data gap. There's a lot of data that's used to make these algorithms. There's a lot of data that these devices generate, and we only have access to a sliver of it that says you have atrial fibrillation. The rest is completely a black box to us, and therefore, in my view, should not be really looked at as medical data. It should really be called what it is, which is just health wellness insights, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that you had a guest that you were going to bring on that we were going to talk to. Tell me a little bit about your guest that we're going to have.
Yeah, so I want to introduce you to Khadijah Ferryman. She's a science expert. She's an expert in health AI and the potential for bias that these algorithms bring. And so, if you think about what artificial intelligence is, basically what machine learning, which allows for artificial intelligence to be created. Machine learning is essentially a way for a computer to take a bunch of data and make sense of it, and then based on that sort of algorithm that it generates to make sense of the data, you can then test that algorithm in a different data set and say, well, how good is this algorithm at making sense of the world? I'll give you an example. Let's say there's 100 people that are wearing an Apple Watch, and the data that it generates, you basically know who has AFib and who doesn't. And so all you do is you feed the computer everyone's data from their Apple Watches, and then you tell it these 10 people ended up developing atrial fibrillation. Now, can the program tell you what is the algorithm that will predict who will end up having atrial fibrillation? That's essentially what machine learning does at its core. And then ultimately, if that algorithm is accurate, when you test that algorithm, you can sort of see how accurate it is. And if it's relatively good, then you can put it out in the real world. And what it does, outside of what we used to just do statistical analyses, what it does really well is, what it does better than just a simple statistical analysis is it's no longer describing the world, it's actually starting to predict the world. And so that's why machine learning is so powerful, because it could be used to predict outcomes. Now, when you train your data on, I'm sorry, when you train your machine learning algorithm, let's call it interchangeably your AI/machine learning algorithm on bad data, your prediction algorithms are going to be biased. And that is what we're seeing in medicine now, where because there's such a disparity in certain groups of people in the United States when it comes to healthcare, specifically underserved communities, people living below the poverty level, Black and Brown communities, Native American communities. There's just, the disparities can go on, right? And
Yeah,
so,
100%. I mean, your community plays a huge role in your health. Like I remember when I lived by my mom's house, the options around her for food were awful. They were mostly fast foods or fried foods, inexpensive foods. It was hard to find organic foods. But when you went to some of the more well to do neighborhoods, you found more healthy food options, you found more organic options, and organic and those types of foods actually end up costing more as well. And that's one of the things that I've been doing is I've been trying to go mostly organic. After my stroke, like I definitely want to make sure that I don't have another one. It's made me take more time to be aware of everything that I'm doing, the foods that I'm putting in my body. But it costs money, right?
yeah.
It costs money to be healthy. It's almost like you know, if we don't if you don't take the time to actually put aside the effort and the money to be able to eat healthy and to do those things, like your chances go up of something going wrong, of in your health going down. So yeah,
You
yeah.
you hit it right on the head, and these are the disparities that we see that are essentially ingrained in our health data. And the algorithms, basically what they see is that somebody who's black is much more likely to die of a stroke compared to somebody who's white, and it thinks that maybe it associates skin color as the reason why, but it's way more. You just told us why it's so much more complicated than that. It's much more likely that the person who is black lives in a community that just doesn't have access to healthy foods, or can't afford organic foods, or doesn't have access to parks. And so because there's already a sort of a potential to have bias in the data that you're feeding the program, it's automatically going to recreate that bias in its output. And what it could potentially
Mm,
do is, um, this is the fear that we all have, is that there's a treatment option available, and the algorithm basically says, well, the treatment option should really be given to the person that's more likely to survive, and that person is the white person that lives in a rich neighborhood, because that's in the data that it's used to train, that person is just the more likely person to survive. And so it systematically would use what it learned to actually exclude people
yeah, that's
from
a
that
slippery
treatment.
slope right there. Yeah.
So that's the part that we are trying to get a handle of. While these programs, while these algorithms are super, super powerful at predicting certain things, sometimes they they often have some level of bias in them, which could actually
Yeah.
harm. And that's what
Yeah.
Khadija Fairman studies. She studies the potential for harm in these AI algorithms, and how do we implement tools and how do we study them so that we can make them useful for everyone and truly be the powerful tool that they're meant to be.
And that's awesome. I'm definitely looking forward to hearing from Khadijah. I'm sure the audience is as well. In the meantime, if anyone has any questions for Khadijah when she comes on, feel free to post them in the comments below. I'll make sure to get them over to her, and hopefully she can answer them and just help us to make our next podcast number 3, even better.
Yeah, and Khadija, we're inviting you to the podcast. I haven't told
Come
her
on,
yet.
Khadijah.
I haven't told her yet, but I'm meeting with her later today, and so she's gonna be
Okay,
invited.
yeah, here we go. I'm crossing my fingers. I have a feeling Khadijah's gonna join us.
Yeah, I think Adrian, this is obviously a topic that I get very excited about, and I think there's so much to uncover. But today we covered AI and health. We uncovered a little bit about the Apple Watch, and I would love to hear for the part 2. What are things that other people want to hear about? What are the questions that they have? Because there are wearable technology is starting to become so popular. There are things that are promising a lot but delivering very little. And so as a stroke doctor, I don't really subscribe to most of the gimmicks out there. The things that I really care about are things related to blood pressure, and there just isn't any good device out there that will monitor your blood pressure. And so these are the topics that I think we can continue to talk about.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like that's important to hear. I feel like the amount the information that we can provide to our viewers and our listeners, if we can help one person, right? If you're out there and you're listening and you've gotten some valuable information and we can prevent you from going through something as traumatic and life altering as a stroke, like we did our job. Now, feel free to send us your questions. And until then, take care.
Yeah, stay healthy.
Stay healthy. Yeah, I love that one. Okay.
Keep that Apple Watch on.